Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to one of the most iconic series here on the GothamChess YouTube channel, How to Lose at Chess. In this series, I show you games that people have sent to me for whatever reason, and I demonstrate how many of these games ruin my day. Some of these games even ruin my vacation, and this will be yet another one of those videos. You see, it's early 2026. I'm in London for the 2026 Speed Chess Championship Finals, which begin just in a few days here. And I made a big mistake of going through my viewer games inbox. And what I will show you today will make you laugh, but also potentially throw up, and I am not responsible for anything that happens to you, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, or anything else. Feel free to check out the rest of the playlist. I'm sure you'll have a really great time. And I'm also not going to tell you the ratings of these players until the end, because you literally will not believe me. On that note, we have Germany, we have Canada. Might be looking forward to an Olympics matchup, the Winter Olympics in Milano. German player opens with e4. Canadian guy plays e5. We have knight f3 and knight c6. So far, so good. You also can play like this if you watch my slow run, if you watch any beginner video on YouTube. All good stuff. White plays the move c3. c3 is called the Ponziani opening. Very good opening, actually. I have a video on it with the title of something like the best beginner chess opening. Clickbaity, but actually very effective. Essentially, white wants to play the move d2 to d4. And if black plays something like bishop c5, you just run directly into white's idea. In fact, you make white completely justified in their opening. That is exactly what black plays. Again, after this game, I will tell you the ratings of these players, and it might make your stomach hurt. Now white just looks like a total genius playing the move d4 with a tempo, attacking the bishop and attacking the center. Black does what any normal person would do here. Pawn takes, and now the bishop is under attack. Every single one of you watching this is probably going, oh, check. That is exactly what black plays. Luckily, it's not a bad move, but white now dominates the center with two active center pawns. And here, plays the move knight c3. So far, this is actually a completely perfect game by white, but that's generally how these videos start. Now, if black is not careful, black is going to play something like knight f6, and white is just simply going to blast forward with the pawns, getting a totally dominant position. So instead of that, black actually plays the move d5, which is a fantastic move, probably made by accident. d5 intends to meet pawn takes d5 with queen takes d5, after which this bishop pinning the knight shows that the knight cannot take the queen. So actually d5 I really like, but that's just about the final move of this game that I really like. White now plays the creative, esoteric, is that a word? Move queen a4. Queen a4 does absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. It pins the knight to the king, and the bishop is protected by the knight, so there's no threat. Now, black here can simply respond pawn takes pawn, which, if you remember black's previous move, would make the most sense. But instead of that, black plays the very powerful, very mysterious bishop d7. Bishop d7 removes all defenders of the pawn on d5, and it's actually a total miracle that pawn takes d5 doesn't just win the game on the spot for white, because you would be attacking the knight, and remember the knight is guarding the bishop. But white is not interested in any of that. White is not interested in taking the pawn, white's not interested in anything else. White plays bishop b5, which I don't completely hate this move. But now we are departing anything normal. Black takes on e4. White cannot take on e4 with the knight due to the pin. White now has multiple options of where to move this knight. You could move the knight to e5, which would be the best move. You also can move the knight to g5, which wouldn't be the best move, but would attack the pawn on e4 and make a lot of sense. Now, friendly reminder, I would not be this mean to these players if they were rated like 200-300. I would say I'm not even being mean, but we'll get there in a second. What you should not do, and in general in your games, going backwards will not result in anything positive. About 8 times out of 10 is what I say. Generally, in your games, going forward will be the better option. White goes back to d2. That's just not a good move, because now you are losing this and you're not getting anything in return. At least the knight actively on e5 could have put pressure on some bishop, on some knight. By returning to d2, black now takes this pawn as well, and in the first 9 moves of the game, those 2 pawns that you so confidently trotted out there, both of these pawns have perished. e4 and d4. From move 5 to 4 moves later, you have lost both of your center pawns. Bad. It's bad. It's not good, right? You also cannot even take the bishop because this would be a triple fork. So total evisceration here by Canadian guy. Just like, you know, full-on hockey brawl here. Bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, white trades everything, and white castles. And black is now totally winning. All black has to do is make a couple of simplifications. The easiest one is to trade the bishop for the knight, and actually after that, put this knight on e2. And that's actually exactly what happens. So up until this point, things are going quite swimmingly. It actually looks like black is going to do some logical stuff and maybe not end up in the How to Lose at Chess series. Nope. No, we are definitely going to end up in the How to Lose at Chess series. King h1, knight takes c3. By a total miracle, black has now allowed white to totally get back into the game. And this is how cruel chess is. Actually, the best move here would have probably been to simplify, just to take the bishop, because black has 2 extra pawns. And then after that, black should move the pawn forward, black should move the knight, black should bring the rooks to the middle, etc., etc. Instead, black takes another free pawn. What could be more logical? Now, the way you avoid stuff like this is here there's a general wisdom, which I will give you, and then there's specific wisdom. General wisdom says, when you're up material, don't get greedy, trade down. More general wisdom is, when you are playing against the bishop, and this bishop is terrible, bishops like open diagonals. So when you just absent-mindedly take the pawn on c3 and you're like, huh, I got 3 pawns instead of 2, you gotta think like, this bishop is gonna come alive. And when it does, it's gonna be a massive problem for you because it's threatening not just the knight, it's threatening the pawn and then trapping your rook. At this point, you start panicking because you're like, what have I done? Now my knight is hanging and I can't move my knight because then I'm gonna lose my rook. Not exactly. You could move your knight, and then when the bishop takes the pawn, you would move this knight, and then you would get, you know, you would get the bishop back at least. Alternatively, you can begin panicking and preparing your submission for this series, which is also totally fine. And so that's why in this position, black went for the ultra creative move e3. e3 is horrendous. e3 doesn't make sense in a lot of ways because, first of all, just at a bare minimum, I can just take it. Now you have the exact same problems, minus 1 pawn, and you activated this rook. You activated the worst possible piece that you could have activated here. Like, the rook is going to come alive and consume the entire rank of pawns. So e3 is just crazy to play here, because I think the logic was, well, if they take my knight, I'm going to take their knight. Let it be known, even if that happened, the bishop would still take the pawn and still trap right. Anyway, now black is totally lost because black opened up the position the worst possible way, and black makes a run for it with knight d5. And white, of course, plays bishop takes g7. Now, let's do some simple math. You're going to lose a rook. That's 5 points. But you can maybe get a bishop back for it, which is 3 points. That makes sense. Alternatively, you can lose the rook for nothing, and maybe you can also lose more pieces, like the knight, for free. So here you play knight takes e3. Black is very much in this position just freaking out, just totally losing it. Like, if they take my rook, maybe I take their rook. Yes. The only problem with the logic is that this rook is just not going anywhere. It's completely trapped. And so here, if white just responds rook to f3, you now have a hanging knight and a hanging rook. Now, does white play rook takes f7 check? No, white actually plays the move rook to f3. This is decent counterplay by black, but just good rule of thumb is if you have 5 pieces remaining, including your king, and 3 of them are on their home squares, and the king is in the center, but really the three are on their home squares, it's probably going to be a bad game for you. I mean, I hate to break it to you. Black now plays the move knight c2, which again continues to make sense if white were to take the rook. But that doesn't happen because the rook can move to c1. It goes to f1. I don't know why it wouldn't go to c1. Like in this position, white attacked the knight, and here white could attack the knight again. But okay, rook f1, you wanted to support, and that rook's not going anywhere. And so black now says, all right, knight h6. You can take my rook, or you can take the piece for free. It is better, of course, to take a completely full piece, because that's just, you're not giving up anything for it, right? And that's what white does. And now it's hopeless. I mean, this position is totally lost. White is up a bishop, but what's even worse than that is how weak this king is. Like, white is going to play rook takes pawn. White is going to hunt down the king on d3, for example. The black knight is just sort of stumbling awkwardly around the board, like desperately hoping for counterplay. But we are far from finished. That is why we are making a video about this game. If this was just a regular run-of-the-mill game, it wouldn't be here. Rook g8. Rook g8 doesn't really do anything. Now white can play rook takes f7 check. White does play rook takes f7 check. Black plays king to c6. Now there is a rule of thumb that I like to give people, especially beginners, but this also works for intermediate. When you are losing a game, and ideally there's no queen on the board, running the king to the other side of the board, running the king out into the open, is actually a pretty good way to confuse people. Because most people are not good enough at checkmating people in like a very random position. So at some point they will just blunder something and the king might come in handy. So in this position, rook c1 is resignation. Rook c1 pins the knight to the... I mean, the knight shouldn't even be there to begin with. And the king shouldn't be there to begin with. You can play rook to c1. You can also play rook takes pawn, and you can probably give another check. And white takes the pawn because it's free. Duh. Black plays a good move, rook d8. Sadly, this move doesn't even threaten the knight because the knight is completely protected, and so rook c1 would once again win material. But also rook f7 is a vicious move. Rooks on the 7th rank going together. Or you could do that. You could basically do anything here and be fine, but neither of those moves were a good move. Now black should probably do something wise. Knight b4. Knight b4 attacks the pawn. I can't provide you any more expert commentary than that. At some point, white should maybe play a move like pawn to h3, or even pawn to h4, just trying to go make a queen, but also making sure the king can never get back rank mated. Look at that. Right on cue. Losing the pawn on a2, but not really caring about it, and black takes it, because what else are you going to do? You've got absolutely nothing going for you in this position. Now white should coordinate the rooks and go hunt down the black king. That's what should happen here. Good. Actually, this was a very logical sequence of moves. White played h3 in order to play king to h2. Should the rook go there, and there are no more back rank checkmates. Rook c8. At this point, the game is over, but it's still going to take a little bit of effort. Like, for instance, white can play bishop to f4, winning the pawn on c7, eating those pawns, and then promoting their own pawns. But, you know, black is fighting. You gotta give black a little bit of credit. Bishop f4 is played. Pretty good technique. Now black plays king b6. That definitely does not stop the idea of taking the pawn on c7. I actually don't care what you take it with. I'll be very honest. You can take it with the rook. You can take it with the bishop. I might keep the bishop on c7 because I want my rooks to be used to checkmate, but I don't care if you play rook c7. Rook c7 is fine, and now black actually should trade some pieces because those rooks are way too powerful. But black plays the move rook f8. And quite soon, for the very first time in this game, you will be seeing an M in the evaluation bar. And as I like to say, when the evaluation of a chess game is a model of a BMW, something has gone terribly wrong. So far, I actually have to say I'm pretty proud of how white has played this. If white was my student, I would give a lot of props. Thank God white is not my student, because what you're about to witness from here, no good. Rook takes b7 check. Fantastic move. Black can run the king into the center. Black can also run the king to the edge of the board. Counterintuitive. You would think, I run into the center, more of the pieces are in the center. It's unsafe. When there are a lot of pieces on the board, yes. In an endgame, and in particular in an endgame without a queen, which controls a ton of squares at the same time, running to the center might actually help you survive longer. Because when you play king to a6, it is mate in 2. It's not an easy mate in 2. It's much more easy in this position to play rook takes a7 check, winning yet another pawn, the last pawn. We talked about this, the pawns were all going to get eviscerated, and then taking the knight. That is far more natural. It's very difficult now to switch your mindset to attacking with the knight. But if you play knight to c5 and the king goes to a5, the king has absolutely no more legal moves. The knight and the rook completely shut it down. And that's actually a very important little pattern. Knight here, king here, rook and knight, when they control a king like this, very instructive. A pawn is mate here, a bishop is mate, another rook is mate if it's on the right square, like for example on a6. It's just good, good thing to keep in mind. Instead, rook a7 appears, king b6. And now white was like, hey, so if I take this knight, they're gonna take my bishop. Very simple little solution. I can give a check, the king will move, and then I will take the knight. Look how logical chess is. If I take the knight, they're going to take my bishop, and then, well, what if I give a check first? Incredible. Isn't that incredible how that works? And then here, and then rook takes a2. Now, you might be sitting, and you might be going, okay, where's the plot twist? If you haven't seen this series before, generally these things, they have a plot twist at the end. Where's the plot twist? Black has absolutely no pieces remaining. There's 2 rooks. A king cannot checkmate a king. Is white going to stalemate black? Is that why I decided to show this game? There's also no back rank checkmate. It is quite literally impossible for these 2 rooks to checkmate the white king. It's not possible. The white king would need to go get ladder checkmated, which is insane. That would never happen. The rooks can't even take this pawn because it's protected by the rook. So, like, what are we even looking at here? Well, rook f1 check. Black still tries. Of course, black could resign at any point. This is instructive. You probably shouldn't resign. King to h2. There are no more checks in the position that make any sense. So what you should do here is you should run around the board with the king. You should also just create random threats with your rook, like rook to e1. You never know when your opponent is going to do something stupid. At this point, white should just preserve the bishop, just put it somewhere safe, or defend it with a rook, and then start checking the black king until it gets ladder checkmated. Bishop f4. Okay, that plan seems to be working. Rook to e4. Now at this point, you can continue to move the bishop around. The problem if you do that is you might get yourself in a little bit of trouble. You can just defend it with the rook, or you can start giving checks to black. Instead, this move is played. I don't really love this move because of this move rook e3, but it's still not over. Rook e3 is a fork. Your knight is hanging, and your bishop is hanging. Well, I have good news for you. You can move the knight somewhere that's a check. So before you move your bishop, you can move the knight. You don't have to lose anything in this position. You also have traps in this position. For example, you can play the move rook to a3, which is a cool move, and it sets up knight to a5 check, which would then pick up at least one of these rooks and make your life much easier. Alternatively, you can begin your submission to this series and play this. And then on the next move, there's a saying in chess. It's when you have one piece hanging, it's good to hang the second one. Like you should just, you got one hanging piece, just give 2 away at the same time. Like why not? Bishop b8 doesn't even, like maybe at this point white was like, oh gosh, like now I don't, just keep giving checks. Just give a check with the other rook. Like for here you can play rook c5 and king e6, and then you can maybe force a rook trade, and you're not going to lose this position. Okay, bishop b8. Okay, black took the knight. Now your bishop is hanging to 2 different rooks. So probably you should move it somewhere safe. Okay, check is fine. Check is fine. King e4. Now you should probably move the bishop somewhere safe. That's safe. And the good thing is that this is still completely protected. Now, white would desperately like to trade a rook here, because with only 1 rook, black is not threatening anybody. With 2 rooks, black still has 1 and literally only 1 way to win this game. Only 1. There's only 1 way to win the game with the 2 rooks. Just 1. 1 way exists. There is 1 way. And all of the, you know how they say there's more possible chess positions on the board than atoms in the universe? That's actually true. You can count it yourself. There is only one way to configure these two rooks to win, and it's not even possible now. Rook a3. The chase for the bishop continues. At this point, you might move the bishop somewhere safe. Hey, how about directly next to the king? Because it's totally safe there. The pawn in front is protected. Now you will bring your pieces over, check the king, and just push the pawns. Connect your rooks and start pushing the pawns. Black plays king to f4. Now let me make this very, very clear in this position. Black here has probably 25 to 30 legal moves. Black can move the king to 2 squares, f4 and d3. Black can move this rook to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. 27 legal moves. And Black manages to play the move that literally gets mated in one. It's made in one after this move. It's like a 3% chance that this could have happened. King f4. At this point with white, you have nothing than giving a check. If you accidentally play this move, the game ends. You play rook c4, and then you hear doo-doo, and you win, because it's mate by mistake. Even if you play rook f2, I wouldn't hate it, because at least you're playing a move that's somewhat logical. If you play rook h4, I wouldn't hate it. Like, at least you're doing something that makes sense. I don't hate this move, but the obsession to connect the rooks probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And now we have rook g3. Rook g3, for a second move in a row, blunders checkmate in one move. This is not even difficult at this point, right? Like, it's right there. It's right in front of you. Rook c4, 2 squares. It's mate. You did all the hard stuff of this game. At a minimum, can you please give a check? Like, can you, just to deflect the king and maybe go rook to g4? Rook g4 would force a trade of rooks. That would be really nice. Okay, we missed mate in one again. The king goes back to f5. Now, rook g4 trades the rooks. Rook f2 at least checks the king further away, and then the king has to run to the middle, and then you figure it out somehow. You connect your rooks, you get rid of everything. Alternatively, after 40 moves of playing a fantastic game of chess, you can blunder and allow the only possible way that you can lose. King h1, rook g1, king h2, rook g2. The most incredible thing about losing the game like this is that if the bishop never came home and never actually physically stood on that square, if it stayed away like on c5, it would have protected the king, would have actually protected the king on c5. Devastating. Unbelievable. And these two people were 1,200. I've shown some crazy stuff in this series. Most of it is like 400 or 500 rated. Oh, this one's tough though.